Hey everyone, so we went ahead and continue with a lecture that we really, we're covering chapter 6, which is methods. And so there are many introductory concepts that we have covered with declaring methods and calling methods and creating parameters, return data types, access modifiers, all these things, the identifiers themselves. This next half of the lecture is more intermediate level method concepts. And so we're just going to dive right in. And as I normally do, just kind of use the slideshow as my guiding topics. And I left off roughly here on slide 9. But that's just my guide. Clear that out. Let me go ahead and make sure that I put this source code, and what I'll do is I'll put this in my repo so you guys can do a pull on my repo and have access to this code. I will put this in the and for the sake of this, I'll just put it in the homework folder. And we'll put this homework chapter 6. All right. Common interview question here. It's kind of like entry-level developer interview question 101. If you're being interviewed for an entry-level developer position, you might get asked, can you explain passing by value and passing by reference? So again, the two options are value, pass by value, or reference. And that those terms mean something, and so I'm going to explain those things. Let me just make a simple form here. And because I'm a naming convention stickler, I'll call this button submit. Make sure that that's named. Okay, little text box. Text number, and I'll do a label result. And of course we've got our event handler, and we're also going to have our private method, custom method. Okay, all this just to say, what's the difference between passing by value and passing by reference? We know that we send data from the event handler to the custom method. Okay, we do that with the use of parameters. Okay, so we could say do something, passing it the value of 10, 10 then is sent into the parameter called value, and then we might, let's return an int, okay? We're going to return value times 2. And then we'll say label result dot text equals do something to string. Okay. So we pass the number 10 into this value. It returns 10 times 2, puts 20 into the text box, into the label. Okay. It's not really reading anything out of here yet. It's just whatever number that we put in here. 15. By the way, 15 is our value that's passed into the parameter. This value is often called an argument. Okay, so the data that's sent from the event handler in your method call into the custom method, this is often called your argument. Whatever goes inside here is called the argument. It doesn't have to be, in this case, it's just the number 15. That's a literal value. It's hard coded in. Of course, we don't have to do that. We could get the int number from the text box and convert that to an int. Okay, so we can ask for input and then pass number into do something. Okay, so number is our argument. Number is read from the text box, passed into this parameter called value. That value is doubled and sent back to the text box. A little bit of review here. So whatever number that we put in the text box, we're just getting a doubling of that number. Okay. A little bit of terminology here. What is an argument? An argument is the value that's passed in the method call. When you're calling the method, the value that's passed into is called the parameter. The parameter is just a variable that's local in scope. In other words, this value parameter is only in scope in that method call. Okay. Variables are variables. So let's get back to the main thing. Passing by value or passing by reference. So let's talk about the first one. Variables in C#, as we have here, this number variable, are passed by value. Variables in C# are passed by value. What does that mean? That means that the argument and the parameter are just copies of one another. So much like when you copy and paste a file on your computer, they start as the same value. If you copy your resume, yeah, let me zoom in. Better? Cool. So variables in C# are passed by value. That means that the argument, being this number, and the parameter, being value, are just copies of one another. So what I mean by copies, the data are just data copies of one another. Those are two different variables in your computer's RAM. Meaning, just like if you copy and paste your resume, you've got two files, that originally they hold the same value, they hold the same data, but by making a change to one, you do not automatically change the other. Okay? So variables are passed by value, which means that the data is just copies of one another. Meaning if I change value in the custom method, it's like changing the copy of your resume, and it doesn't change the value of the original data. The original data was number. Number was passed, and a copy of the value of the data, a copy of the data was created in memory in this variable called value. So these are two copies of one another. The argument and the parameter are just copies, they hold the same data. If I come down here and I say value equals value times 2, and then I return return value. See, down here I actually change value. But it's like changing the copy of your resume. It does not change number. So when you pass by value, you're making a copy of the data, and changing one copy of the data does not change the other copy. Let me demonstrate this a little bit better. Okay, so now you understand that what it means to pass by value. Let me actually demonstrate this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to append the label every time. I'm not going to reassign it. I'm just going to keep appending. And so inside of the event handler, the data is, and then this is in number. Inside of the event handler, the data is whatever will be read out of the text box. We're then going to pass that. I'm going to change this back to void. Okay. I'm going to pass that into do something. We're going to pass the number into value. We're going to print it out. Then we're going to change it. Value times equals 2. We're going to double value. We're going to print it out again here. And then after the method call, I'm going to print out number again. So I'm going to, inside the event handler, the method is, I'm going to print it out. I'm going to call do something. Do something is going to send the number into value. So their copies are being made. It's going to print it out. It's going to be unchanged at this point. This line changes it. This line will show you that change. Then after the method call here on line 36, it'll say back in the event handler, the data is number. So I say 10. Whoops, we need line breaks. So I'm going to do \n for a nice little line break here on each one of these. What'd I do? Number. Text number dot text. Let's put a breakpoint in because something is not working. Debug. Start debugging. Submit. Oh. Put. Stop. Debug. Start debugging. Put a number in. Click submit. Click next. Number holds the value of 10. Label result.text. Prints out 10. Calls do something. Value prints out 10. It doubles. Value prints out 20. You notice number is still 10 here. That's the point of this demonstration. Oh, let's see. I'm making a Tuesday morning mistake. Wednesday morning, let's see. String.format. It seemed to be working before I put my new lines in. And all of a sudden my new lines acted like they broke it. Sorry, class. Nope. Wasn't the new lines. I didn't think so. Normally I got a bunch of eyes on me and they see my mistake. Anyone see my mistake? Label result inside of the number. No one sees my mistake either. It's in my string.format. Because if I just do this, label result.text, it prints out 2. Yeah, I'm making a silly mistake in my string.format. Zero's the first placeholder. Number. Like if I get rid of this $sign. I'm getting. That's not going to work because that's going to put 0 in the. Goodness. Yeah, with the $sign you don't need the placeholder. Problem fixed. Just looked at that for 3 minutes too long. We've all been there. I'm human. Let's bring this back. Pop up. That's not the point of this demonstration. syntax bites us in the butt. All right. Number, value, debug, start without debugging. 12. Okay. Inside the event handler, inside the custom method, it's still 12. Inside the custom method, it doubles to 24. Back in the event handler, the method is 12. Okay. So that is a demonstration of passing by what is known as value. Okay, which is to say that the data is a copy of one another. And by changing the data in the custom method, you do not change the data in the calling method. The calling method is your event handler. Okay, so again, when I think of passing by value, definitely take a note, write that down. When I think of passing by value, what the note you want to say is, a copy of the data is made, and the two variables are in separate locations in memory. Therefore, changing one does not change the other. Very much like copying and pasting your resume, changing one copy of the data does not change the other. Okay? Now, with that being said, you could probably guess the other way that you can pass data. We just covered passing by value. Okay, the other one is called passing by reference. We just learned that passing variables like your regular old data types, int, double, floats, and so forth, those variables pass by value. Let's talk about passing by reference. Okay, so let's pass by reference. Now, I'm going to comment out my code here. So if variables in C# are passed by value, and more specifically, I would say your primitive data types, such as int, double, float, char. Okay, all those data types. Because variables is too broadly scoped. I'm going to say primitive data types. Arrays and objects are passed by reference. Okay, now we haven't really worked with objects yet. That's the next chapter. But we have worked with arrays. So let's pass an int array. And let's change value sub 0, multiply it by 2. Now our array is just going to hold the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is going to multiply 1 times 2 because value sub 0. It's going to double that to 2. So, and we don't even need all this data inside of our array. For the sake of this, we can have an array with one piece of data. Okay, so we print out the number 1 here. Let's call do something, passing it our array, even though our array just has one piece of information. We'll print out that value here. We'll double it to 2. We'll print out the number 2 here. The data in the array is, this will be value sub 0. Again, value sub 0. Label result.text. We'll just copy, oh gosh, fat finger. Highlight this line of code. Sorry, folks, getting a little sloppy. There it is. Okay, so before the method call, then we pass the array to the method. We print out the value before it's doubled. We print out the value after it's doubled. And then back here, we print out data sub 0. So arrays and objects are passed by reference. Passing by reference means that the parameter is an alias for the argument. And what I mean by that is by changing the parameter, when you pass by reference, when you change the parameter, you also change the argument. So by changing value, the value array, it will come back and it will also change this data array. Okay, so it's kind of the opposite of passing by value. Passing by value says you make a copy. Passing by reference means essentially you've got two names for the same array. The data array and the value array are just two different names for the same thing. So, you know, you might call your best friend Robert. Someone else might call him Bob. Bob and Robert are the same person. You know, changing one thing, changing Bob's hair color, change Robert's hair color. Okay, so changing a piece of information on one changes a piece of information on the other. Okay, so passing by reference means you have an alias for the data. Value becomes an alias for this data array. And let's demonstrate that. Doesn't even matter, we're not reading from a text box anymore. So if we just click plus, inside the event handler, the data holds 1. Inside the custom method, the data is 1. Inside the custom method, the data is 2. Back in the event handler, the array holds 2. Right? So back in the event handler, the data holds 2. Of course, I'm missing my line breaks, so let's clean that up. Put our line breaks back in. Okay. So that's the difference between passing by value and passing by reference. Again, this is interview question, very commonly asked for entry-level programming positions. Can you explain the difference between passing by value and passing by reference? Passing by value makes a copy. Passing by reference is more of an alias. Okay? Changing one copy of the data does not automatically change the other. When you're passing by value, when you're passing by reference, you can change in the custom method. You change the data. It also changes the data in the calling method, right? So we've got the calling method, which is your event handler. And then you got the called method, which is your custom method. All right, so that took 30 minutes to get through, but there's some basics there. Any questions before I move on? Questions, comments, concerns? All right. Now, again, it's worth noting that your variables that are your standard data types are passed as values. Arrays and objects are passed by reference. These are their defaults. Okay. You can change their defaults. You can change the default way that data is passed. Let's just change this from an array back to a normal int. And I'll explain why you would do that too. So why would you do this? Well, what we learned last chapter is that a custom method can have many inputs, but only 0 or 1 output. The output being the return data type. Okay, so this right now is returning void, but this is either void or a single piece of information, like a single string, a single double. If I had multiple, this is an example where I've got multiple inputs into a method. You got 2 inputs, but I've only got 1 output. Therefore, I can only change one variable here in the calling method, the event handler. This is let's return value plus value 2. So notice this do something returns 1 plus 4, and therefore I can only change one variable to the left of this method call. So that's a limitation, if you will, of custom methods. You could only change one piece of information here if you've got a standard data type. So what we can do is we can change the default way the data is passed. We can make, again, these are passed by value by default, but we can change that. Okay, again, so that way we can change multiple pieces of data in the event handler, not just change one piece of data in the event handler. Okay, so let's do this. So the way to do that is to declare as ref or out. Okay, so there's a difference between ref and out, and I just demonstrated it there. Let's talk about ref first. me just one tick. I'm a little rusty, so I had to clear off the rust here. Okay, had to knock off some rust. Here we've got a standard piece of data. It's an int, holds a value of 10. Keep in mind that data passes by value. But by changing its default type, we put the keyword ref in front of it. Therefore, if we change value inside of this method, it also changes data back in the calling method. So, and let's return value. Even though we don't really need this value here. So what we need to pay attention to here is our data. I'll say int data 2, but data 2 doesn't even matter at this point. So we're passing 10. It's going from data into value. Value is being tripled. So 10 is being tripled. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to output data here and show you that by changing value inside of our custom method, it automatically changes data because we told it to pass by reference. And you do that in the method call. I don't know why I was, again, knocking some rust off earlier. So if I, again, here's the output. The out should be 10. We pass 10 into value. 10 gets tripled. Doesn't even matter that we're returning this value of 30 because we're not using value. We're just outputting this data variable. So the out should be 30. And there you go. So we just changed our primitive data type to passed by reference, which again means an alias. So data and value become aliases of one another. By changing value inside of this custom method, I also change data back inside of the calling method. Now, I go back to why would you do this? Well, now inside of this method, I could change ref data 2. You got to put the keyword ref in both places. So you put it on the method call and you put the keyword on the method declaration. Well, now by changing data inside of the method, by changing data or data 2, by changing value or value 2, I could say value 2 equals value 2 times 4. By changing value 2, I'm also changing data 2. And if I output data 2 to string, I have changed these two variables now inside of our event handler. We couldn't do that before because methods only return one piece of data. So if I wanted this custom method to modify multiple pieces of data in my event handler, one way that you could do that is by passing by reference. And again, the return data type isn't even being used here, so I'll just return some nonsense 10. You can make this void if you wanted to. Point being is we triple one number, we quadruple the other. So 10 is going to go to 30, 20 is going to go to 80. We get 3080 in the output. I know that was a little bit choppy there, so I apologize for that. Again, I had to knock some rust off. If you don't do this every day, the syntax escaped me for just a brief moment. Now, the thing about ref is that you'll notice I have to put data in ref variables before I use them. There's another one called out, and ref and out do the same thing. However, the difference is that ref, you had to initialize your data. You had to initialize your data before you passed it. Out, you don't need to do that. Out, you could simply say, you could just initialize it in here. Doesn't matter what we return. Okay, so ref and out are very similar. They both pass variables by reference. The difference is that ref variables must be initialized before they are passed as arguments. Out variables do not need to be initialized before they are passed as arguments. They both pass as reference. They act just the same. Therefore, changing value inside of do something here also changes data and data 2. Right? So notice I changed value and value 2 to 12 and 14. If I output data and data 2, it'll be 12, 14. Right? So they both pass by reference. We understand why we pass by reference. We pass by reference because that allows us to, inside of a method, to change multiple variables inside of the calling method. Right? Again, our calling method is our event handler. Okay. Let's go ahead and pause. Okay, folks, we are back from a little break, and 2 more concepts to cover. I'm going to kind of covered out in ref, passing by reference, passing by value. Okay. 2 more concepts that we're going to cover. Default values. Which are also have the name of optional parameters. And we're also going to talk about passing by names. So we've talked about passing by reference. We've talked about passing by value. Now we're going to pass by variable names, which is another thing. So optional parameters, we're going to start with that. And then we'll talk about passing by names. And then that'll be the end of the method. The end of the lecture. All right. So let's do optional parameters. Right now, I'm going to make this method kind of simple. Doesn't really matter yet. Okay, empty method takes in 2 ints, has no return type. So kind of simplify this. Right now, to call do something, we have to pass it 2 values. Okay, this is the only way that this is going to compile. If you only pass it 1 value, okay, that doesn't work. You know, you got 2 parameters, so you need 2 arguments. Okay, and the data types have to match. If I do 1.5, you can't pass a 1.5 into an int. All right, so data types have to match. The order has to match. Okay, this is the only way this works as up until now, as we've learned. An optional parameter means, and you do this, you start it by declaring it here. And say, if you don't give me a second value, which makes it optional, it's going to assume the default value of 10. So if I just do a label result.text equals value to string, okay. So it's just going to print out 1 is going to be passed into value, but since on this method call I didn't pass a second number here, this value 2 has a default value of 10, and it's going to print out 1, and then it'll print out 10. Ooh. Old code doesn't really apply to us right now. So it prints out 1 and 10. So this can be useful if your data has some sort of default value, but you also provide a way to override that. So for example, if I do 1 comma 30, well, 30 will be passed into value 2. So value 2 no longer has a default. It's only used if you don't pass it a value. But since you are passing in a value here, now if I run it, you'll notice it uses the value that's passed to it, not the default. Okay, so that's your optional parameters. If you assign it a value when you're declaring it, that becomes optional. Now, the rule for optional parameters is that they have to be the last values. You notice, basically to the right, I can't make this middle one optional and then this value 3 mandatory. Okay, so this is mandatory, this middle one is optional. So the optional ones have to come at the end of the list of parameters. So if they're both optional, then that's fine, because the last 2 are optional and then this one is mandatory. Okay, so the optional ones have to come at the end of the parameter list. Okay, and this one, mandatory, optional. But again, it's optional, it's at the end. That's fine. If I come into here, again, I can't just come in to make the first one optional. That's breaking the rule. Okay, last ones have to be optional. Okay, so 1 would be passed into value, 30 would be passed into value 2. Since you don't pass anything into the third one, it assumes the default value of 12. And you could just continue this. But if you do pass it a value, 12.4, there you go. So those are your optional parameters. And again, these are very scenario based as to when you would use these. If you have a piece of data that has a default value, but you also, have a scenario where you might pass something into it. Okay, so let's kind of do this. So we got rid of all optional. Now they're all mandatory. Passing by names, and some things I think are commonly used in industry. Some things that we're learning. Passing by names isn't the best programming practice. Okay, kind of like the break and continue keywords. They can be used, but they come with some caution. Okay, break and continue inside of your loops. They kind of they come with caution. You want to use them sparingly because they change the default behavior of the loop. They cause the loop to terminate a little bit early, and so that can cause confusion when you use break and continue. Like when you're troubleshooting a giant loop that's 100 lines in code, and there's a break in there that you didn't see because there's 100 lines of code and you didn't see the keyword break, and you can't figure out why your loop is terminating early. Well, it's because you got this keyword in here that causes that to happen. Some caution around using passing by names, and I can explain why. But let me explain how this is done. So we could say do something, and when you do this, notice on the method call, they give you the names of the parameters. I call it value, value 2, and value 3. I could say value 3 colon 10, value 2 colon 20, value colon 30. So this specifically sends 10 into value 3. This sends 20 into value 2. This sends 30 into value. So it'll go 30, 20, 10 on the output. 30, 20, 10 on the output. So if you don't, if there's a scenario where you can't, because right now we could do the same thing. We could do 30, 20, and 10. Okay, and then passing by name makes no sense because you could just do the same thing without it. Where it makes sense is if you can't, when you start adding in like optional parameters. Let's see. Value 2. Again, my example is falling apart here on me because I don't think we don't use this a lot in class. So value 2 colon 10, value is 10, and then that still is optional. Pause my recording here. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit more digging because although I can show you how it's done, I also like to talk about why it's important and in what scenarios would they be used. So I'm going to admit that I'm going to need to do a little bit more digging on this. Again, syntax and all this kind of stuff. I could show you how it's done, but I'm going to do some more digging. So I'm going to stop the lecture here at just a little short of an hour, and we covered all the material. Again, I need to do a little bit more digging on one piece. But that's a good stopping point for the lecture, and I'll look into that last piece a little bit more.